Hi, this is Leonie Jackson, writer and journalist from World into Words, and I'm here again with Catherine.
Yep, I'm Catherine Morgan from Talking Money.
And this is our third, I believe, podcast today. Today's topic is all about women and investment, a topic that's quite close to both of our hearts, and something we wanted to understand a little more about. I think we've all heard the sort of statistics about men being better investors and all of that, but we didn't feel that was particularly helpful in itself. So we had the initiative to do a bit of our own research and also talk to some real women about how they've come to their attitude and the conclusions they've come to about investment.
Yeah, and I know as an investment broker that the majority of my clients are men.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm very happy to take business from anybody.
Of
but
course.
It's always troubled me that there aren't more women and, dare I say it, younger women who are wanting to invest in the way that I see a lot of my male clients do that. So
Sure.
While they're not a big part of my client pool right now, I'd like them to be. I'm completely supportive of the sort of gender changes that you hear about. And gender investment differences is something that I'm very interested in getting to the bottom of. So, yes, that's exactly why we decided to do some research. There's a ton of information out there. I mean, it's easy to, as you say, find statistics.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was really to try and actually speak to real women and pad that out a bit and find out what attitudes are out there and what's really going on right now.
Yeah, I feel strongly that it's all very well knowing the statistics and the percentages, but that doesn't change behaviours. I know there have been various initiatives in the past to try and get women to change their attitude towards investment, but for me, I think the key is to understanding why. Why do women form their opinions about money? What are the restrictions perhaps placed on women financially? What are the things that we can be teaching our daughters or, the young women coming through business that will actually change those attitudes and make them more likely to invest and be inspired to grow their money?
And what we're looking for, I suppose, or what our theory is that women could and should be as adept at investing and as well financially educated as men.
Well, there the numbers are in our favour, aren't they? Because when women do invest, we perform extremely well against men. So
yeah, you're right. And we also saw, and again, I read this all the time, women are better as a discipline at saving their money.
Yeah.
But men typically are the ones doing more investing. So it doesn't mean they're better at investing, but there are more men investing money. There are more women saving money.
And just though we sign off the obvious here, that is because research shows that women are more averse to risk. Men are happier to take risks and obviously speculate to accumulate. That's kind of signed off the cliches, if you like. But
is that the sort of hunter-gatherer versus homemaker?
I suppose
really
so.
That deep in terms of biology?
Possibly. It makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, but I think I'm kind of bored of hearing that. I think the research that I've done, there's a lot of people saying the same things. No disrespect, we do need that. We need a bit of psychological background to it, but again, for me, that doesn't change anything. And the sort of cliches about women being risk averse. Not always, there are lots of women that ride motorbikes and do all sorts of daring things. So what is it specifically when it comes to money? What can we do to help change that? And I think that's something from our research and also talking to women, we've got somewhere, haven't we? We've actually drilled down and got 5 really good reasons why.
I think so. There's 5 factors that we'll cover in the podcast that seem to tie a lot of this together. The first being education. So let's talk about that. It's abundantly clear when someone is well educated around money that they start life as an adult with a better sense of economics, terms like inflation or
most definitely
the idea you have to pay tax on your money. I mean, basic things. When you're an infant, it might start with pocket money.
Yes.
But the whole education of children to be numerical, to look at numbers and not feel sort of foxed and frightened. And my perspective coming at this was that I'm a governor at my son's infant school. And I know, looking at maths and looking at the data, that we definitely see trends every year. And this is not where I live, this is nationally, time and time again, that girls quickly seem to drop off in terms of maths achievement versus boys.
Right.
And when you talk to teachers in the classroom, you hear again and again, the boys are there happy to put their hand up. They're all sitting saying, me, pick me, I've got the answer.
So that's confidence with numbers already starting to wane at infant school potentially.
I think so, and teachers really, certainly in recent discussions, saying we've gone and picked girls and tried to give them the confidence and expected that they would also be able to do these things, rather than the old-fashioned style of teaching where perhaps the boy would put his hand up and he'd be asked, and trying to get more creative with girls about maths isn't black and white. There isn't always a right number. I mean, there is, but there are different ways you could get to that number.
Yeah, that's something we touched on in the article, wasn't it? That in fact the black and white, the factual side of maths appeals to a very male brain, and actually the female brain will warm much better to creative or philosophical approach to maths, which I find really interesting. I think I'd like to drill a bit deeper into that one too, but that's not for today.
And so I think maybe the data shows that girls don't take as well to maths, albeit there are, of course, exceptions. That's something that education has to work harder to address, and good schools and good teachers will do that. But beyond that, money itself is not really a curriculum topic.
No, it isn't.
So just to talk about money education, I mean, pocket money, yeah, that's one.
But is maths being tied to money as an education? I mean, it's a life skill, isn't it? So are we already disassociating maths with everyday life, and it's for people that want to be accountants or in your line of work?
Do fractions and things like that, but not actually then work out how much interest you've made on your bank account this year.
Yeah, versus how much you will have lost to inflation or rise of living costs and so on. Yeah, I don't see enough of that, I have to say, in schools. And as you know, I've got my youngest child is just in sort of halfway through senior school, so it's not that many years ago for me. And I don't feel that maths was tied too well to money.
And is there any mention at all in any of the topics that he does around, I don't mean pure economics, but economical behaviour and the role of money, paying tax, saving money, anything like that?
No, in fact, my oldest two daughters both studied business studies, and made a point of saying to me that was the first time that any of the kind of life skill around numbers was ever mentioned, and that was in a business.
And we heard that, didn't we, when we were talking to a lawyer?
Absolutely.
In our survey.
Yeah, we did.
So it seems quite late on, unless you've done maths all the way through and are quite well attuned to numbers, the remainder of people probably leave education in this country without a good grasp of money. So it's very much based on what you've heard perhaps at home or with the other influences in your community. And we'll come on and talk about parental influence later.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the next factor, I think when we were talking to people that came through, was confidence. And that could be lack of confidence, or that could be, we saw women who were very confident and very agile and understood money and saving very well. So I think the assertion that we're making is that with confidence, you then feel you can take more risk. You understand the resources where you can go and find investments. And so as you become an adult, if you have confidence with money, investing is not a scary discipline.
No.
But for women we talked to where that perhaps was the case, again, it's all about confidence.
And perceived lack of confidence, that women are generally viewed to be not as literate with money or around money, and therefore start to doubt their own ability. But again, as we said before, the results of investment actually prove that women are more competent than perhaps they give themselves credit for. But we heard some quite funny stories about advice given back in the 80s, 90s, about how a woman should always carry a copy of the Financial Times in her bag to appear more financially literate than perhaps she might be. I mean, that seems shocking now, but
there was also a lady who said, I've been running businesses since I was 15, and she'd had probably more of the example set through her father, which again we'll talk about parents in a minute. But what was interesting was her innate confidence about money.
Yes.
She was a true businesswoman, and not that old, but actually when you consider she felt she'd been running businesses since she was in her teens.
Yes, indeed.
Gosh, when I think back to my childhood, where was I at 15 with money? Not anywhere near as advanced, and that's a confidence thing.
Yes.
It's like, being a parent or whatever you do in your occupation, these confidences, these areas of confidence that we have in our life, but applied to money, it's really no different.
And those two are linked, confidence and education. Obviously, if we can get in there and give that confidence early, then it's going to hopefully have a knock-on effect as women start to be independent with their own money and have the confidence to know what's the best way to manage that money.
Also, the one of the ladies that we spoke to in our research, she was a business owner, but I remember her talking about how she had started to do early stage investing now with companies that were much more immature, and the confidence she'd had from making money. So perhaps traditional investments are the starting point, but the more that you do and when you start to see returns, obviously that's like the proof in the pudding. You begin
to have the confidence to diversify.
Think, yeah, I can make myself some money.
Yeah.
And then you perhaps take more risk, or at least you have a more evolved sense of the risk that you're taking when you make your next investment decision.
And I think these are the women, because as we learned, peer-to-peer learning is extremely powerful. And I think this is the point. We need to give these women the voice to teach other women, because until something changes, investment marketing is very much aimed at wealthy, older guys, let's face it.
What sort of hoops you have to jump through in terms of the FCA.
Right,
of course. To promote properly. So that...
Yeah, and I think it's important to give this voice. These are the conversations, and you're very aptly named Company Talking Money. These are the conversations we need to be having, because that, along with education, is where that confidence will come from.
And yet, I mean, I agree with you, but then how often do you, as a woman, if you're sitting with another woman that you respect, how often is she giving you share tips or saying, hey, I've just invested in this business, do you want to have a piece of it? I can introduce you to the company.
Yeah, never.
It's never happened to me, and I'm in investments.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just, I don't know what it is. It doesn't seem to be the sort of thing that women chit-chat about. And I'm not being sexist. I'm not saying they're talking about hair and beauty or the price of nappies, but they're not often talking about investment. And maybe it's in Britain because there's an element of we're a bit reserved, we don't want to talk about money, but blokes swap these things on the train. I was in a bar in London, sitting next to a group of guys on their lunch break, and they were all swapping share tips, and it was a sort of chest beating thing of like, look, I'm up 20% on, I don't know what the share was, but I grinned because we were in the middle of all this research, and I was thinking, there we go.
But there is the answer, though. You said chest beating. Women just tend not to be less so, I think.
And yet, if you've done really well on an investment, and you've got a friend you care about and you think she's got a bit of money, that's a really good thing to do, isn't it? You share.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a discount on champagne in Tesco this week.
So I think that's how women would.
Investment?
Sure, I think that's how women would approach it. It would be, I care about you, I'd like to pass this tip on, as opposed to copying the chest beating. I think that doesn't come very naturally to us. But I like the idea that we encourage people to, if they have done well on something, share your good news, share your good fortune. I think that's a really, really positive message.
Yeah, agreed. So confidence was the second factor. The third was time. And
universally cited by every woman we spoke to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And is that because most of the women we were talking to were between, I don't know, let's say 20 and 55, and that is the middle crunch point of adult womanhood, when you are maybe trying to build your career, you're having babies, you might be looking after parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying men don't have these pressures, and increasingly they're sharing those pressures, but historically, and with the women that we've been talking to who've already grown up, the context already is, where would I find the time?
Absolutely.
To sit down and
spend hours checking share prices was something that was mentioned a couple of times. And I think one woman told us that she'd seen the amount of time her male friends spent checking share prices, and she just has no incentive to do so, doesn't have the time, and that's the perception around investment, let's face it, isn't it? That, who's got time for that? It's the
reality. There are some, okay, you might be able to go to a stockbroker and get a sort of FTSE all-share type low risk or moderate risk portfolio done for you. But that's not really, I don't think, what we're talking about here. This is about getting more confident with money. And that takes time, reading. We're not talking about the FT even, but the financial pages of a newspaper once a week, or downloading some friendly apps that can help educate you about money, or whichever way you want to take the information in. But yes, it's time that we often don't have, or linked to the confidence point we choose not to have. So I think it was that same lady, and I would think about relatives I won't name, who would say the pension statements that come and they pile up every year, and I don't even understand them, and I can't be bothered mentally to sort of find the time. Now, I'm a bit of a pensions geek, so I get excited when my pension statements come in, genuinely, because I recognise that we're a long time retired, and that's a really important time of life to be budgeting for now. But most people would have this inertia, and these are bright women who work, who either have been auto-enrolled in a pension or have chosen to set up a pension. Maybe they get a free portion of that from their employer every month. But when the statement comes, there's this inertia of, I can't access it, I don't really understand what it means, it's 3 months out of date.
Yeah.
All these different things we heard put in front of women as to why they can't or won't spend the time engaging. And for me, that's an absolute travesty, because without sounding like a wise ass, that is such an important period of our lives, usually the end of your life when you don't have as much earning power, and it's in your gift to manage now, and yet women often are not very interested in that. And I do think it's a confidence thing. I do think it's dedicating a bit of time to it.
But things are changing, right? So we also heard from some women that were either starting to dip their toe into investment or were quite established in doing so. Apps and platforms and things, greater visibility, up to date, because as you were saying, pension statements can be 3 months behind, and it feels, as you're talking, it feels quite laborious, and who's going to be incentivized in the middle of their busy day to stop and sit and work out with a calculator what their pension statement's telling them. But
and technology is a big
technology is helping.
You're right. In fact, I think a lot of the big pension companies, there's some requirement now that they make it able for people to log on and see their balances. It's different if you have a final salary pension, because there's lots of complex valuations that have to be applied. But for people who are just saving into a pot, and that would include auto-enrolment, you should be able to access values quite quickly. And it's one of those things, when you first look, it probably is a bit of a minefield, but maybe you call up the provider and you get a bit of an explanation.
Yeah.
And then the third time, the fourth time,
like
the fifth
anything.
time, you log on and you see it growing.
Yeah.
And that, again,
once
I'm
you're
not
familiar with it,
everyone's driven by money, but once you understand that, you become more vested in its performance, and maybe you get excited because you can see, this is a balance that's growing,
yes,
or it's going up and going down, but you start to understand more about how the money is performing.
You're engaged with it, and yeah,
absolutely. The next factor was security, and this was about, I suppose, it's linked to risk, really. A fear from some women that can take risk and you can actually lose a lot of money with investing. And dare I say it comes back to the women save, they don't invest theory that you read about a lot. So to get someone to put away a bit of money, a bit like the old sort of, you've got your housekeeping budget in the old days, I don't think is too difficult for women.
No.
Of course, you get some people who are just spenders, but I think the idea of putting a bit away is something that women do. I think the challenge, though, is then getting them to make an investment decision where they might lose it. And a lot of investments, your capital is at risk, whereas in a bank, hopefully, unless it's 2008, banks don't normally go bust and your money is usually safe.
Yeah. There's all the more reason for that money to work harder, because as women, we're living longer. Well, we're all living longer, but women can often expect to outlive men.
Mm-hmm. And you're not earning in that later period of life.
No, and it tends to be women that will take career breaks. Again, we have to be careful not to make sweeping generalisations, but it was certainly what we heard from a lot of the women we spoke to, that they were conscious that they had taken career breaks to care for their families, their children.
So what you mean, in that time, they're not necessarily paying the NI, they're not contributing to a pension, they're not earning money from a job, which means they could save money.
Absolutely, but also just the need for that support in later life. There's all the more need now, with interest rates being so low. we've got to find ways to grow money. There's
You
no
can't
use.
just save it,
Can't
right?
just save it. It's
No.
not going to grow. Not going to grow. In fact, it's going to go backwards, as I think we've touched on before.
And the women who wise up to that and understand this point, which you're right, we have said before, inflation being over 2%, you have to at least be getting that for your money to keep at the same
To stay
level
where it's at,
in a year's time. And how many bank accounts, current accounts or cash ISAs offer more than 2%? Hardly any.
No.
So most people's money, if they're just saving it and they're not investing it, is staying still or going backwards.
Yeah.
And I
Which is a
think,
sobering thought.
Agreed. And women need more money for a longer period of life, and they may have had bigger gaps in their earning potential. And so it's almost like a triple whammy. So, I think a lot of the women that we polled were saying financial security was so important, and that was why they were worried about taking risk. But it's a paradox. You have to take some risk that you're comfortable with, but you have to think about a level of risk you're comfortable with and then invest accordingly. If you just save and you don't invest, it's very, very difficult to meet the objectives that we all surely will have.
Yes.
I mean, I worry about that there won't be a state pension. I'm 42, so the retirement age is going up to, I think, 66. It will probably be 70 something by the time
we're there, yeah.
and then you've maybe got another 20, 25 years if you're lucky. So, that's an awfully long time. The final and I think sort of juicy angle, the bit that everyone gets excited and engaged with, is what did your parents tell you or teach you about money? And for me, that was the most sort of obvious factor that is your starting point, along with education.
Well, this is what so many women volunteered, wasn't it? Without us actually directly asking the question, so many women we spoke to made reference to either how they were teaching their children about money or how they were taught about money. And interestingly, lessons were learned either because they were taught well and set a good example, or because they realised that their parents' spending habits would be a disaster for them. And there were some quite funny stories that came out about women, starting
having
off as
mums who are spenders.
Spenders, yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that is of personal interest to me and hopefully to other people, and I know you as well, of what do we gain from the financial education we're given or not given.
So do you remember the lady that we spoke to who said she'd had a mum who was a real spender and she'd learnt about money from her father? And it was as though that was fine because she had had a role model that was good with money, and so she'd adopted her father's habits. She definitely decided...
She consciously rejected her mother's spending habits, didn't she? I can't be like that. Yeah, absolutely.
And she was the same one who said she'd been running businesses for a long time, and she was really mimicking her father.
Yes.
That resonated with me because I had a mum who was mainly a housewife when we were growing up and at home with us, and a father who was working, and I would also echo that I learnt a lot about the role of money and the need to invest from my father. But so perhaps is it true to say that if you have a parent, it doesn't matter what the sex is here, this isn't really about gender, it's about being in a household where somebody is role modelling using money well,
yes,
and perhaps having a sort of evolved sense of risk and being able to articulate that to you so that you grow up confident and able to invest.
Yeah, I think so, and that's certainly what we found from the women we spoke to. And I think, if nothing else, just to be talking about money. I mean, I know your father was particularly savvy with money. My father, earned well, had a great career, but never really talked to me about money. Possibly that was a gender thing. I don't know. I don't want to speculate on that, but. I think making a conscious choice to talk to children about money and to link the numbers that they're learning with money, I think that's the start point. However engaged you are yourself, I mean, I know you're going to raise your boys to be very financially literate because it's what you do. But I think all of us can make sure, all of us with children, or even just mentoring, the next generation in business, it doesn't matter. If we were in a position of any influence, I think there is a responsibility there to have those conversations.
I agree, and I think talking about it regularly. So, I mean, I have clients who have maybe an annual or a triannual money chat with their kids. Now their kids are perhaps out of education and are earning, and often that's a point in a child's life where there's a good opportunity, or when they're looking for a deposit and you see a parent contributing partly a little bit of money towards a deposit.
Yes.
Is, when you give money or you support a child, there's also an opportunity to throw in a good bit of education there as well.
Yeah.
I'll lend you this, but there are some obligations around that. So, parents who guarantee a student rental contract when your kid goes to university, or being a guarantor on a mortgage, or, there are definitely moments or transactions in a child's life as they become an adult
that
could
present
be a wedding.
that opportunity.
Yeah, it could be a money gift at a wedding, where parents have an opportunity. So I guess it's also a message to parents, to men and women. This isn't really gender specific, but we have to get women better at it. We have to get the mum who's probably educating her kids that they can do anything and have any job and get equal pay and all that stuff, to also be saying, and you need to be smart with your money when you've earned it.
I think that's the key difference. I think it's not about being sensible with money. That, we know women are sensible with, we tick that box. But it's about understanding how money grows and how to prepare for the future, and that squirreling money away is not going to do. I think that's the key part of education. I know that with my children, they are very sensible. They know how to budget. They understand that money doesn't grow on trees. And, I've watched my elder daughter go into rental accommodation, and she's budgeted very well on in the early days was quite a limited salary, and has grown that way. But it's getting across the idea that, money, other than in property, money won't just grow by itself. We've got to actively do something and become aware of that. And I think that's the key education that needs to happen.
Yeah, and the older statements that we've heard peddled out, like borrowing is bad, don't get in debt, and saving and being thrifty is good, I would argue have almost changed. I mean, some people, as long as you can repay, some people will use debt because interest rates are low as an enabler. So with education comes the ability to use money for your own means better. Yeah. And so I think it's quite a blunt piece of advice to be saying, yes, save it and invest it. That's the advice, really. It's been a really interesting topic to look at. It surprised me, some of the conversations that we would have had.
I was pleasantly surprised by how willing women were to open up about their entire financial history and their personal circumstances, and just, almost over eager to share that. And that says a lot, I think, about the opportunity that is presenting itself for women to talk about it, to have those. We didn't really meet anyone who was reluctant, did we, or hesitant?
No, I think there's less ego with money, and perhaps less secrecy, where men are more competitive, and wouldn't necessarily. I mean, we didn't talk numbers with anybody, but we did talk about emotions and trends and education around money. And I think women find that easier to access and reminisce and emote, and so that could be a basis for more conversations with mothers, with daughters, with parents.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm really encouraged by the fact we have actually drilled down a little deeper, and hopefully in this podcast and obviously the article in full, we've actually got some reasons now. We've got some things we can work on, because as we said at the top, it's all very well knowing what the differences are, what the gender biases are, but what can we do about it? And hopefully these 5 categories that we've identified, and I'm sure we'll go on to drill even deeper into each one perhaps, but that's what we can do about it. These are the 5 areas where we can really change, education, confidence.
Well, hopefully it'll be of use to women who are listening. And if you want to see the full article, go and have a look at www.talkingmoney.co, where you can see the article, and please do give us feedback and comments.
Definitely.
For further topics.
Brilliant. Okay, well, it's been great to talk to you, and
thanks, Leonie.
I enjoyed our research, and I look forward to the next topic.
Great. Thanks for listening.